The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Whitman as Lena Armstrong stood on the wooden porch of her new home, watching soldiers drill in the dusty yard. 3 weeks had passed since she'd arrived with her father, General Marcus Armstrong, recently appointed commander of this remote outpost in Apache territory. The journey from Boston had been grueling, but nothing compared to the suffocating sense of isolation she felt now. "Miss Armstrong, your father requests your presence in his office," Lieutenant James Collins said, his voice startling her from her thoughts. Lena nodded, smoothing her pale blue dress. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll be right there." The fort's command building stood at the center of the compound, its weathered boards telling stories of harsh seasons and constant vigilance. Inside, General Armstrong's office was a testament to military precision. Maps covered the walls, each pin and marking representing strategic points across the territory. "Lena, come in," her father said without looking up from his papers. At 53, Marcus Armstrong remained imposing, tall, broad-shouldered with silver streaking his once dark hair. 20 years of commanding men had hardened him, especially after losing his wife, Lena's mother, to influenza 7 years ago. "You wanted to see me, Father?" "Yes." He finally looked up. "We're having visitors tomorrow. A delegation from the Apache tribe led by Chief Nakohe. It's a peace negotiation, and I want you to attend." Lena's eyes widened. "Me? But why would you?" "Because you're my daughter, and I want to present a united front. Show them that we have families too." His tone softened slightly. "Besides, you've been cooped up in this fort since we arrived. This might interest you." Lena hesitated. Her entire life had been defined by her father's military career, moving from post to post, learning to adapt quickly, never questioning orders. But the stories she'd heard about the Apache since arriving had painted them as bloodthirsty savages. "Will it be safe?" she asked. The general's expression hardened. "They wouldn't dare harm anyone under a flag of truce, and we'll be surrounded by armed men." He returned to his papers. "Wear something appropriate, something dignified." The dismissal was clear. Lena walked out, her thoughts in turmoil. Her entire life she'd been taught to fear and distrust the natives, yet tomorrow she would face them directly. That evening, Lena stood at her bedroom window, watching the distant mountains turn purple in the fading light. In Boston, she had attended parties, read books, and dreamed of adventure. Here, confined within the fort's walls, those dreams seemed childish. A knock at her door broke her reverie. It was Mrs. Harper, the doctor's wife, one of the few other women at the fort. "I heard you'll be at the meeting tomorrow," Mrs. Harper said, entering the room. "Nervous?" "A little," Lena admitted. "I've never met any Apache before." Mrs. Harper sat on the edge of Lena's bed. "They're people, Lena. Different customs, different beliefs, but people all the same." She sighed. "My husband has treated some of them, says they're proud, honorable in their way. Father calls them savages. Your father has fought them for years." Mrs. Harper's voice was gentle. "War changes how men see their enemies." After Mrs. Harper left, Lena couldn't sleep. Outside her window, the vast desert night sparkled with stars, unlike anything she'd seen in the east. Somewhere out there beyond the fort's walls were the people her father considered enemies. Tomorrow she would see them face to face. The delegation arrived at midday. Lena stood beside her father on the steps of the command building, wearing her finest dress, deep green with modest lace trim. She'd pulled her chestnut hair back severely, hoping to appear mature and dignified. The Apache riders entered the fort in a solemn procession. Their faces were painted, and they sat tall on their horses, eyes watchful and wary. At their head rode an older man with deep lines etched into his face and a feathered headdress, Chief Nakohe. But it was the warrior riding beside him who caught Lena's attention. Younger than the chief, perhaps in his late 20s, he rode with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. His long black hair was tied back with a leather thong, and unlike the others, his face bore no paint, only the natural dignity of sharp features and penetrating dark eyes. Those eyes found hers, and for a moment, everything else faded away. Lena felt a strange jolt, like lightning traveling through her body. The warrior's expression didn't change, but something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, though of what she couldn't say. "Chief Nakohe," her father stepped forward, breaking the moment. "Welcome to Fort Whitman. The chief dismounted, moving with the deliberate pace of age and authority. "General Armstrong," he replied in accented but clear English, "we come to talk peace." "Then let us talk." The general gestured toward the command building. As the Apache warriors dismounted, Lena couldn't help but watch the young man who had caught her attention. Up close, she could see a scar running along his jawline and the subtle patterns woven into his clothing, craftsmanship beyond the savage descriptions she'd heard. Inside, the meeting began formally. Lena sat quietly beside Mrs. Harper as the men discussed boundaries, hunting rights, and recent skirmishes. The young warrior, she learned, was called Chayton, son of Chief Nakohe and future leader of his people. He spoke rarely, but when he did, even her father seemed to listen with grudging respect. Hours passed. The discussion grew heated at times, voices rising as past grievances were aired. Through it all, Lena found her gaze returning to Chayton, studying his expressions, the controlled power in his movements, the intelligence in his eyes. Once he caught her watching and held her gaze for a heartbeat too long. As the meeting concluded, the two sides reached a tentative agreement, a boundary line that neither would cross for the next moon cycle, allowing tensions to cool. "My daughter will show you to where refreshments have been prepared," General Armstrong said stiffly, the hospitality clearly a reluctant concession to diplomacy. Lena rose, suddenly nervous. "This way, please," she said, leading the delegation to the adjacent room where a simple spread of food and drink awaited. As the others moved ahead, Chayton fell into step beside her. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, his presence commanding without effort. "You are the general's daughter," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Lena Armstrong." She hesitated, then added, "And you are Chayton, the chief's son." A slight nod. "You are new to this land." "Is it that obvious?" she asked, surprised by his perception. "Your skin has not yet been touched by our sun, and you look at everything as if seeing it for the first time." Something in his tone made her glance up. There was no mockery in his expression, only a curious intensity. "I arrived 3 weeks ago," she admitted, "from Boston." "Boston?" He tested the word. "That is far to the east, where the sun rises." "Yes, very different from here." They had reached the refreshment room. For a moment they stood in the doorway, apart from the others. "This land," Chayton said softly, "it changes those who come to it. Either it claims them, or it drives them away." Before she could respond, her father called her name. The moment broken, Chayton moved away to join his people, leaving Lena with an unsettling sensation, as if something important had just begun. Later that evening, after the Apache delegation had departed, Lena sat in her room, sketching in the journal she'd brought from Boston. Without intending to, she found herself drawing Chayton's profile, the straight nose, the determined set of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes that had seemed to see through her carefully constructed propriety. She closed the journal quickly when her father knocked and entered. "You conducted yourself well today," he said, the rare praise making her sit straighter. "Thank you, father." He paced the small room. "I want you to understand, Lena, that what happened today was necessary diplomacy. But don't be fooled by appearances. The Apache cannot be trusted. They've killed good men under my command." "Chief Nakohe seemed reasonable," she ventured carefully. "Nakohe is old. His influence wanes." The general's face hardened. "It's his son we need to watch. Chayton has led raids against settlements to the north. He's dangerous, educated by missionaries but rejected their teachings, knows our ways well enough to use them against us." Lena thought of the man who had spoken to her so perceptively. "He didn't seem savage to me." Her father's eyes narrowed. "That's precisely what makes him dangerous, Lena. Remember who you are and where your loyalties lie." He moved to the door. "Colonel Patterson and his family arrive next week from Fort Bowie. They have a son about your age, Harvard-educated, from a good military family. I expect you to make him welcome." After he left, Lena returned to her window. In the distance, beyond the fort's walls, she thought she could see the pinpricks of fires in the mountains, the Apache camps, so close yet separated by more than just distance. She didn't know then how those fires would come to symbolize her own burning heart, or how the man she'd met today would challenge everything she thought she knew about her world and herself. 2 weeks after the peace delegation's visit, Lena rode along the perimeter of what her father considered safe territory. Lieutenant Collins accompanied her, as was required whenever she left the fort. Though she chafed at the constant supervision, she had to admit the lieutenant was pleasant company, educated, courteous, and less rigid than most of her father's officers. "The Patterson family seems to have settled in well," Collins remarked, as their horses walked side by side. "Young Robert has certainly taken an interest in you." Lena suppressed a sigh. Robert Patterson had indeed shown interest, painfully obvious interest, since his arrival. He was handsome enough with his blonde hair and blue eyes, and certainly well-mannered, but his conversation consisted mainly of Harvard anecdotes and military aspirations. "He's very dedicated to his future career," she replied diplomatically. Collins laughed. "That's one way of putting it. Your father approves, though." "My father would approve of anyone with a West Point ambition and a respectable family name." They crested a small rise, and Lena pulled her horse to a stop. The landscape before her took her breath away, red rock formations reaching toward the sky like nature's cathedrals, valleys dotted with juniper and sage, and in the distance, the purple shadows of mountains. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Beautiful, but dangerous," Collins cautioned. "Everything out here can kill you. The heat, the lack of water, the wildlife." He glanced significantly toward the mountains. "And the natives." Something caught Lena's eye, movement among the rocks about 100 yards ahead. Her heart quickened as she recognized the figure of a man on horseback, partially concealed by a boulder. Even at this distance, something in his posture was familiar. Chayton. Their eyes met across the distance. He made no move toward them, simply watching from his position on higher ground. "Lieutenant," she said quickly, "I believe we should turn back now. The sun is getting quite strong." Collins followed her gaze and stiffened, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Apache, we need to return to the fort immediately. Stay behind me." As they turned their horses, Lena couldn't resist looking back. Chayton remained where he was, a solitary figure silhouetted against the vast sky. She had the strangest feeling he had been waiting for her. That night, a summer storm rolled in from the mountains. Lena lay awake, listening to the rain pound against the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. The encounter with Chayton played in her mind. Had it been chance, or had he deliberately positioned himself where she might see him? A sharp knock at her door startled her. It was Mrs. Harper, her expression urgent. "Lena, your father needs you. A wounded Apache boy has been brought to the fort. He stumbled up to the gates half dead. The doctor's treating him now." Heart pounding, Lena quickly dressed and followed Mrs. Harper to the infirmary. Inside, Dr. Harper was bent over a small figure on the examination table, while General Armstrong and 2 officers stood grimly to the side. The boy couldn't have been more than 12. His slight body was covered in cuts and bruises, and a deep wound on his leg had been bandaged. "Will he live?" her father demanded. Dr. Harper nodded. "If infection doesn't set in." "He's exhausted and dehydrated, but young and strong." "What happened to him?" Lena asked. Her father turned, noticing her for the first time. "Lena, you shouldn't be here." "I asked her to come," Mrs. Harper interjected. "We need help tending to him, and the other women are asleep." The general frowned but didn't object further. "The boy says he was attacked by a mountain lion while collecting medicinal plants for his grandmother. Got separated from his companions." "And you brought him inside the fort?" Lena couldn't hide her surprise. Her father's policy had always been strict about keeping natives outside the walls. "He's a child," Dr. Harper said firmly, "and he came to us for help." The general's jaw tightened. "Once he's stable, he'll be returned to his people." He turned to his officers. "Send a rider at first light. Inform Chief Nachkohe we have one of their children. Arrange a neutral meeting point for the handover." After the men left, Lena helped Mrs. Harper clean the boy's other wounds and coax him to drink water. He watched them with wary, pain-filled eyes, occasionally murmuring words in his native tongue. "Poor child," Mrs. Harper said softly, "out alone in that wilderness." By morning, the boy's fever had broken. Lena brought him a simple breakfast and sat beside his bed while he ate cautiously. "What's your name?" she asked gently. He studied her before answering. "Ahote." "I'm Lena," she smiled. "You're safe here, Ahote. My father has sent for your people." A flicker of relief crossed his face. "Chayton will come." Lena's heart jumped at the name. "Chayton? The chief's son?" Ahote nodded. "He is my uncle. He teaches me to hunt. To track. Pride crept into his voice. I was not careful. The mountain cat found me first. You were very brave to make it to our fort, Lena said. The boy's expression grew serious. Chayton says we must learn about the white eyes, know their ways. He glanced around the infirmary. Even their medicine. Lieutenant Collins appeared at the door. Miss Armstrong, a delegation from the Apache has been sighted. Your father requests your presence at the meeting point. 30 minutes later, Lena sat beside her father in an army wagon, a Hote lying on a makeshift pallet in the back, attended by Dr. Harper. They traveled 3 miles from the fort to a flat area beside a stream, neutral ground. 24 soldiers accompanied them, rifles at the ready. A small group of Apache riders appeared from the east. Lena immediately recognized Chayton at their head. Unlike the formal delegation that had visited the fort, these were warriors ready for conflict if necessary, faces painted, weapons visible. The two groups stopped 50 yards apart. Only Chayton rode forward, alone and unarmed. General Armstrong, after a moment's hesitation, did the same. From her position in the wagon, Lena could hear their conversation. Where is the boy? Chayton's voice was controlled, but she detected the underlying tension. Safe. My doctor has treated his wounds. We will take him now. The general nodded stiffly, as a gesture of goodwill between our peoples. Dr. Harper helped Ahote from the wagon. Despite his injuries, the boy insisted on walking the short distance to where Chayton waited, limping but determined, his pride evident in every painful step. When he reached his uncle, Chayton dismounted and placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, examining him carefully. He spoke softly in their language, and Ahote responded, occasionally glancing back toward the wagon. To Lena's surprise, Chayton then walked toward them, leading his horse with Ahote beside him. When he reached the wagon, he looked directly at Dr. Harper. My nephew says you saved his leg, perhaps his life. The words seemed difficult for him. The Apache remember those who help our children. Dr. Harper nodded simply. I'm a doctor. I help those in need, regardless of who they are. Chayton's gaze shifted to Lena. And you? Ahote says you were kind to him. Heat crept into her cheeks under his intense scrutiny. Anyone would have done the same. No. The word was soft but certain. Not anyone. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Then, with a slight inclination of his head that might have been a bow, Chayton turned and lifted Ahote onto his horse. Without another word, he mounted behind the boy and rode back to his waiting warriors. As the Apache disappeared into the landscape, Lena's father returned to the wagon, his expression troubled. What did the savage say to you? He demanded. He thanked us for helping the boy, Doctor. Harper answered before Lena could speak. Nothing more. The general grunted, seemingly satisfied with this explanation, and ordered the return to Fort Whitman. During the journey back, Lena remained silent, replaying the moment when Chayton had looked at her. There had been something in his eyes, a question perhaps, or a challenge. Either way, she couldn't shake the feeling that it had been meant for her alone. 3 days later, Lena was in the fort's small library when Robert Patterson found her. Tall and immaculately uniformed despite the heat, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. Miss Armstrong, I've been looking everywhere for you, he said, removing his hat. Your father mentioned you enjoy reading. When I can find books I haven't already finished, she replied, gesturing to the meager collection. Robert stepped closer, too close for propriety. I was hoping you might accompany me for a walk along the parade ground this evening. The sunset here is quite remarkable. Lena hesitated. Robert was exactly the sort of man her father wanted for her, respectable, ambitious from their social circle. Yet she felt nothing when he stood near, no quickening of her pulse, no desire to know his thoughts. That would be lovely, she said anyway, years of social training overriding her reluctance. Later, as they walked the perimeter of the parade ground, Robert spoke at length about his plans to follow his father into the cavalry, his Harvard connections, and the Eastern society he clearly missed. Lena made appropriate responses while her mind wandered to the mountains beyond the fort and to dark eyes that had seemed to see through her carefully constructed facade. Your father tells me you're quite accomplished, Robert was saying. Piano, French, watercolors, all the refinements a gentleman appreciates in a wife. The word wife snapped Lena back to the present. Mr. Patterson, we've barely met. He smiled indulgently. Of course, I'm getting ahead of myself, but our fathers are old friends, and out here suitable matches are rare. I simply want you to know that I admire you greatly. Before she could formulate a response, the fort's alarm bell began to ring. Soldiers rushed to their posts as an officer shouted orders. "What's happening?" Lena asked a passing sergeant. "Apache raiding party hit a supply wagon 5 miles south," he answered hurriedly. 2 men dead, 1 wounded. Colonel wants a pursuit organized. Robert's expression hardened. "Savages. This is why we can never trust their peace talks." He turned to Lena. "You should return to your quarters. I must report for duty." As he strode away, Lena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The fragile peace had been shattered, and with it, any hope of understanding between the two worlds that increasingly divided her heart. In the days that followed, tension at Fort Whitman reached a fever pitch. Patrols were doubled, and civilians, including Lena, were restricted to the fort's interior. Her father worked long hours, his face grim each time he returned from meetings with his officers. "Was it Chayton's people who attacked the wagon?" Lena asked one evening as they sat at dinner. The general's expression darkened. "We believe so. The survivors described warriors matching his band." He set down his fork. "I've sent word to Fort Bowie requesting reinforcements. We'll mount a punitive expedition as soon as they arrive." "Punitive?" Lena's stomach clenched. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means, daughter, that we will find their camp and teach them the consequences of murdering American soldiers." The coldness in his voice frightened her. "But what about the peace talks? Chief Nakohe claims no knowledge of the attack. Either he's lying or his son is acting without his approval." Her father's eyes were hard. "Either way, blood has been spilled, and there must be a response." That night, unable to sleep, Lena slipped out of her room and onto the small porch behind their quarters. The fort was quiet except for the regular patrol of sentries along the walls. Above, the desert sky blazed with stars, indifferent to the human conflicts below. A movement in the shadows startled her. She stiffened, ready to cry out, when a familiar voice spoke her name. "Lena Armstrong." Chayton stepped into the faint light, and her heart nearly stopped. He wore dark clothing, his face streaked with shadow-concealing paint. How he had entered the heavily guarded fort, she couldn't imagine. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, glancing fearfully toward the nearest guard post. "If they find you—" "They won't." His confidence was absolute. "I had to speak with you. They're saying your warriors attacked the supply wagon, killed 2 men. His expression hardened. "Not my warriors, not my people." "Then who?" "Renegades. Men who follow neither my father nor me." His voice was low, intense. "Men who want war. My father is planning a punitive expedition against your camp." Something flashed in Chayton's eyes. Concern, not fear. "How many soldiers?" "I don't know. Reinforcements are coming from Fort Bowie." He stepped closer, and Lena caught the scent of sage and open sky. "Why are you telling me this? You betray your own people." The accusation stung, but she met his gaze steadily. "I don't want more bloodshed on either side." For a long moment he simply looked at her, as if trying to read truth or deception in her face. Then, to her shock, he reached out and touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "You don't belong here, Lena Armstrong. Not in this place of death." His touch sent electricity through her body. She should step away, scream for the guards, remember her position as the general's daughter. Instead, she remained still, captivated by the intensity in his dark eyes. "Neither do you," she whispered. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. Chayton melted back into the shadows with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. "I will find you again," his voice came softly from the darkness. "When the moon is new, by the painted rocks where we first saw each other." Then he was gone, leaving Lena trembling with fear, confusion, and something else, something that felt dangerously like longing. The sentry passed, nodding respectfully to her, before continuing his rounds. Lena returned to her room, her mind racing with questions. Why had Chayton risked death to speak with her? Why had she warned him about her father's plans? And most troubling of all, why did her heart race at the memory of his touch? Over the next 2 weeks, as Fort Whitman prepared for conflict, Lena found herself living a double life. By day, she performed her duties as the general's daughter, entertaining officers' wives, attending to correspondence. even enduring Robert Patterson's increasingly determined courtship. By night she lay awake, counting the days until the new moon and wrestling with her conscience. To warn Chayton had been treasonous. To meet him would be unforgivable. Yet the thought of not going, of never seeing him again, filled her with a despair she couldn't explain. The night of the new moon arrived. During dinner, Lena complained of a headache and retired early, knowing her father would be occupied with his officers until late. She changed from her formal dinner dress into a simple dark skirt and blouse, then wrapped herself in a shawl. Sneaking out of the fort proved easier than she'd feared. A delivery wagon was leaving through the main gate, and in the confusion of checking its contents, no one noticed a slender figure slipping into the darkness beyond the walls. The painted rocks lay 2 miles from the fort, a collection of wind-carved boulders decorated with ancient native symbols. Lena had visited them once before with Lieutenant Collins. Now, as she approached them in the starlight, her heart pounded with fear and anticipation. "You came." Chayton's voice emerged from the shadows before she saw him. He stepped forward, no longer disguised with war paint, dressed in the everyday clothing of his people. "I shouldn't have," Lena admitted. "Yet here you stand." They faced each other in the starlight, representatives of 2 worlds locked in conflict, yet somehow drawn to this forbidden meeting place by a force neither fully understood. "Your father's soldiers search for our camp," Chayton said. "They will not find it. We have moved deeper into the mountains." "The reinforcements arrived yesterday," Lena told him. 60 men with a Gatling gun. They leave at dawn." Chayton nodded, unsurprised. "Why do you tell me these things? Your father would call it treason." "I don't know." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I only know I don't want you, your people, to be killed. Many on both sides have already died in this long war." His voice carried the weight of history. "My father fights for our way of life. Your father fights for what he calls progress. Neither will surrender. And you? What do you fight for?" Chayton was silent for a moment, looking past her toward the distant fort. "I was sent to the white man's school as a boy. For 7 years they tried to kill the Apache in me. Cut my hair, beat me for speaking my language, told me my gods were false." His eyes returned to her face. "I learned your ways, your words, your thoughts. When I returned to my people, many distrusted me. Yet now you lead them. I lead them because I understand the enemy." He stepped closer. "Or I thought I did, until I met you." The confession hung in the air between them. Lena's pulse quickened as he moved closer still, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, feel the heat radiating from his body. "What do you mean?" she asked, though some part of her already knew. "You are not what I expected, Lena Armstrong. You look at me and see a man, not a savage. You risk your safety to prevent bloodshed." His voice dropped lower. "You haunt my dreams like a spirit I cannot banish." No man had ever spoken to her so directly, with such raw honesty. In Boston drawing rooms, emotions were hidden behind elaborate social rituals and polite phrases. Here, under the vast desert sky, Chayton stripped away those protections, leaving her feelings exposed like the bare rock around them. "I think of you too," she admitted, the words both frightening and liberating. "I shouldn't, but I do." Chayton reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and took her hand in his. The contact was electric, sending shivers up her arm. His skin was warm, calloused from a life lived close to the elements. "This is madness," Lena whispered. "Perhaps." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Or perhaps it is the only sanity in a world gone mad with hatred." Before she could respond, he tensed, his head turning sharply toward the direction of the fort. A moment later, she heard it too, hoofbeats approaching rapidly. "Someone followed you," Chayton said, releasing her hand and moving toward the deeper shadows. "No, I was careful." "Lena!" Robert Patterson's voice cut through the night. "Lena Armstrong!" Panic seized her. "It's Robert Patterson. He must have seen me leave." "Go to him," Chayton urged. "I will vanish." "When can I see you again?" Even in the darkness, she could see the conflict in his eyes. "It is too dangerous." "Please," she insisted, surprising herself with her desperation. After a moment, he nodded. 3 nights from now, the abandoned mission by the river. Then, with silent grace, he disappeared into the desert night. Seconds later, Robert rode into the clearing, his face twisted with anger and confusion, when he spotted her alone among the rocks. "Lena, what in God's name are you doing out here? Your father has half the fort searching for you." She manufactured a look of embarrassment. "I needed air, time to think. The fort feels like a prison sometimes." "A prison?" He dismounted, his expression incredulous. "It's protection. Do you have any idea how dangerous it is out here?" He looked around suspiciously. "Were you meeting someone?" "Of course not. Who would I meet?" Robert studied her face, not entirely convinced. "Get on the horse. I'm taking you back before your father organizes a full search party." As they rode double toward Fort Whitman, Robert's arm around her waist felt like a shackle. Behind them, the painted rocks stood silent under the stars, witnesses to a forbidden connection that would change everything. The expedition against the Apache left at dawn as planned, but without General Armstrong at its head. At the last minute, orders had arrived from territorial headquarters requiring his presence at a strategy meeting in Tucson. Command of the punitive force fell to Colonel Patterson instead, while Lieutenant Collins remained behind as acting commander of the reduced garrison at Fort Whitman. Lena watched from her window as the column of soldiers disappeared into the morning haze, Robert Patterson riding proudly beside his father. Her feelings were conflicted: relief that her father would not lead the attack against Chayton's people, fear for what might happen when the soldiers found them. Her deception the previous night had required careful explanation. She had claimed insomnia and a desire for fresh air, apologizing profusely for the worry she'd caused. Her father had been stern but ultimately accepted her story, though he restricted her movement to the interior of the fort as punishment. "You're fortunate young Patterson found you," he'd said grimly. "There are worse dangers than Apache in the desert at night." Now with both her father and Robert away, Lena found herself under the looser supervision of Lieutenant Collins and Mrs. Harper. The reduction in garrison strength meant everyone had additional duties, leaving her with more freedom than she'd had since arriving at Fort Whitman. 3 days passed in anxious anticipation. No word came from the expedition, which Lena took as good news. Surely if they had found and engaged Chayton's people, riders would have been sent with reports. On the third night, as darkness fell, Lena faced her most difficult decision yet. The abandoned mission lay 4 miles from the fort, too far to walk in the time available. She would need a horse, which meant taking one from the stables, which meant committing an act that couldn't be explained away as a simple evening stroll. Mrs. Harper provided the opportunity without realizing it. Over dinner, she mentioned that Lieutenant Collins would be inspecting the perimeter guards from midnight until dawn, and most of the remaining officers would be in a strategy meeting until late. "Such a shame they keep the men so busy," the older woman sighed. "The young officers used to organize dances even out here in the wilderness. Now it's all war preparations." After retiring to her room, Lena waited until the fort grew quiet. She changed into her riding clothes and darkest shawl, then slipped out toward the stables. The night sentry was at the far end of his patrol route, giving her just enough time to saddle her favorite mount, a gentle mare named Penny. Leading the horse quietly through the side gate used for small patrols, Lena nodded casually to the guard, a young private who looked barely old enough to shave. "Evening patrol for Lieutenant Collins," she said with feigned confidence. "I'm to meet him at the South Ridge." The private hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, Miss Armstrong, though it's mighty strange for a lady to be riding out this time of night." "Lieutenant's orders," she replied, mounting smoothly. "Military necessity." Before he could question her further, she rode into the darkness, her heart pounding with the audacity of her deception. Once beyond sight of the fort, she turned east toward the river and the ruins of the Spanish mission that had been abandoned decades earlier. The ride took nearly an hour, the terrain growing rougher as she approached the river. By starlight, she could make out the crumbling walls and fallen bell tower of the mission ahead, a ghost of European ambition long reclaimed by the desert. She dismounted at the edge of the ruins, tethering Penny to a withered tree. "Chayton?" she called softly, moving toward what had once been the mission's central courtyard. No answer came. The adobe walls, eroded by decades of wind and rain, cast strange shadows in the starlight. Lena felt a prickle of unease. Had she misunderstood? Or had something happened to prevent him from coming? A soft whistle, like the call of a night bird, came from the ruined chapel. Lena turned to see Chayton emerge from the doorway, his expression guarded until he confirmed she was alone. You came, he said, the same words he'd spoken at their last meeting, but now tinged with something like wonder. I said I would. Lena stepped closer, suddenly shy despite the boldness that had brought her miles from safety to meet him. Chayton gestured toward the chapel. Inside, the walls hide us from watching eyes. The chapel's roof had partially collapsed, allowing starlight to filter in through the gaps. An altar stone remained at one end, worn smooth by time and weather. Chayton had lit a small fire in what had once been the sacristy, its glow casting warm light over the ancient stones. The expedition left as planned, Lena said, seating herself on a fallen beam. Colonel Patterson leads it, not my father. Chayton nodded, settling across from her. We know. Our scouts watch them fumble through the mountains. A hint of amusement crossed his face. They follow old trails that lead nowhere. You've moved your people? To a place they will not find. He studied her face in the firelight. You rode alone through the night to tell me this? Lena looked down at her hands. No, I came because... How could she explain what she herself didn't fully understand? I came because I needed to see you again. The honesty in her voice seemed to touch something in him. Chayton moved to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. In my tribe, he said softly, there is a story of two stars that burn on opposite sides of the night sky. They can never meet, for if they did, the world would end in fire. Yet they never stop looking toward each other across the darkness. Is that how you see us? Lena asked. Destined to remain apart? Perhaps. Or perhaps the old stories don't account for hearts that refuse to obey the boundaries set for them. His voice deepened. I have tried to forget you, Lena Armstrong. I have prayed to my ancestors for guidance, but your face haunts me whether I am awake or dreaming. The raw emotion in his words mirrored her own conflicted feelings. Since their meeting at the Painted Rocks, Lena had barely slept, torn between duty and the inexplicable pull she felt toward this man. I know nothing about you, she said, except that you're supposed to be my enemy. What would you know? And so, beside the small fire in the ruined chapel, Chayton told her of his life. Of his childhood in the mountains before the white settlers came in numbers. Of being taken at 9 years old to the Indian school in Pennsylvania, where he had learned English, mathematics, and Christianity, alongside brutal lessons in obedience and shame. Of returning to his people at 16, caught between worlds, no longer fully Apache in their eyes, yet never to be accepted as white. My father sent me there believing I would bring back knowledge to help our people survive, he explained. Instead, I brought back anger and confusion. It took years for me to find my place again, to remember who I truly was. And who are you? Lena asked. Chayton looked into the fire. I am my father's son, future chief of a people fighting to exist in a changing world. His eyes returned to her face. But I am also a man who questions whether hate must always answer hate, whether there might be another path forward. His story moved her deeply. The structured, privileged life she had known in Boston seemed shallow compared to the struggles he had endured. Now you, he said, tell me of Lena Armstrong. She hesitated, feeling her own story inadequate. There's little to tell. I was raised in military posts and Boston society. My mother died when I was 17. Since then, I've followed my father from post to post, keeping his house, attending functions, being the perfect officer's daughter. And is that who you truly are, the perfect daughter? The question struck her like a physical blow. Who was she beyond the roles she'd been assigned? What did she want for herself, separate from her father's expectations? I don't know, she admitted. Until coming here, I never questioned my path. Marriage to a suitable officer, a life like my mother's, moving from post to post. Her voice trailed off as she realized how empty that future suddenly seemed. And now? Chayton pressed gently. Now everything feels uncertain. She looked directly into his eyes. Because of you. The confession hung in the air between them. Chayton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek as he had at their last meeting. This time his fingers traced a path down to her jawline, leaving trails of fire on her skin. From the moment I saw you, he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt as much as heard, standing beside your father at the fort, I knew you would change my life. I tried to deny it, to remember that you are the enemy's daughter. I'm not your enemy, Lena whispered, leaning unconsciously into his touch. "No." His eyes darkened as they dropped to her lips. "You are much more dangerous than an enemy." The distance between them vanished. Later, Lena would never be certain who moved first, only that suddenly his lips were on hers, gentle yet insistent. The kiss was like nothing she had experienced before, not the awkward pecks from Boston suitors, but something primal and honest that awakened parts of herself she hadn't known existed. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Lena felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. Everything she had been taught about propriety, about her place in society, about the unbridgeable divide between their peoples, none of it seemed to matter in the face of this undeniable connection. Chayton rested his forehead against hers. "This cannot be," he murmured, even as his arms tightened around her waist. "Yet it is," she replied simply. They remained in the ruined chapel for hours, talking, learning each other's stories, occasionally falling into silences filled with cautious touches and wondering gazes. Chayton spoke of Apache traditions, of their deep connection to the land, of the ceremonies that marked the passages of life. Lena described Boston's cobblestone streets, symphony orchestras, and the ocean that Chayton had never seen. When the first hint of dawn appeared through the broken roof, reality intruded on their sanctuary. "I must return before I'm missed," Lena said reluctantly. Chayton nodded, helping her to her feet. "The expedition will return soon, having found nothing, but your father will send others." "I know." The weight of the world settled back onto her shoulders. "What will we do?" He traced the outline of her face with gentle fingers, as if memorizing her features. "For now we return to our separate lives, but 3 days from now, if you can come again, I will be waiting." "Here?" "No. There is a place—" He described a hidden canyon 2 miles south of the mission, where a spring created a small oasis among the rocks. "Few know of it. You will be safe there." They walked together to where Penny waited patiently. As Chayton helped her mount, their hands lingered, neither wanting to break the connection. "Be careful," he said. "Trust no one with knowledge of our meetings." Lena nodded, suddenly afraid. What they had begun could destroy them both if discovered. 3 days, she promised. She rode back to Fort Whitman in the growing light, slipping into the stables just as the morning bugle sounded. If the stable master noticed Penny's warmth or dampened saddle, he made no comment. Back in her room, Lena lay fully clothed on her bed, her mind and heart racing. She touched her lips, still feeling the pressure of Chayton's kiss. Whatever happened next, she knew with absolute certainty that her life had changed irrevocably. The expedition returned that afternoon, dusty and frustrated. Colonel Patterson reported directly to Lieutenant Collins, but Robert sought out Lena, finding her in the small garden behind the officers' quarters. "We found nothing," he said without preamble, his face tight with anger. 5 days of searching and the savages vanished like smoke. Lena kept her expression neutral, though her heart soared with relief. "Perhaps they've moved on from this territory." Robert snorted. "Hardly. They're out there watching us, laughing at us." He paced the small garden. "Colonel Patterson believes there may be a spy in the fort, someone passing information to them." Ice formed in Lena's stomach. "A spy? That seems unlikely. How else would they know exactly when and where we plan to search?" Robert's eyes narrowed. "The Apache have sympathizers, traders, missionaries, even some of the enlisted men who've gone native. Surely my father doesn't believe such rumors." "Your father returns tomorrow. We'll see what he believes." Robert moved closer, his voice softening. "I was worried about you while I was gone, Lena, after finding you out alone that night." "I've been perfectly safe within the fort," she assured him. He took her hand, his touch causing none of the sensations that Chayton's had. "I care for you deeply. You must know that. When this Apache business is settled, I intend to speak with your father about my intentions." Panic fluttered in Lena's chest. "Robert, we barely know each other." "I know enough." His smile was confident, that of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "We're well matched, Lena. Our families, our backgrounds, our positions in society. Out here, suitable matches are rare, and you must think of your future." Before she could formulate a response, Mrs. Harper approached, saving her from the uncomfortable conversation. "Miss Armstrong, Lieutenant Collins requests your assistance with the wounded. Several men returned with injuries that need tending." Grateful for the interruption, Lena excused herself, leaving Robert standing in the garden with his presumptions and plans that now felt like a trap closing around her. For the next 2 days, Lena performed her duties mechanically, while her thoughts remained with Chayton and their planned meeting. General Armstrong returned as expected, immediately calling a council of officers to discuss the failed expedition and future strategy. The evening before she was to meet Chayton again, her father summoned her to his office. His expression was grave as she entered. "Sit down, Lena." She obeyed, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Had he somehow learned of her meetings with Chayton, of her betrayal? "Colonel Patterson has formally requested my permission for his son to court you," the general said without preamble. "I've given it." Relief that he didn't know her secret was quickly replaced by a new anxiety. "Father, He raised a hand to silence her. "Robert Patterson is an excellent match, West Point graduate from a good family, with promising career prospects." His voice softened slightly. "Your mother would have approved." The mention of her mother was a calculated move. Lena felt tears prick her eyes. "I hardly know him." "You'll have time to become better acquainted. The courtship will be proper and supervised." His tone made it clear this was not a request, but an order. "Robert will be joining us for dinner tomorrow evening to make his intentions official." Tomorrow evening, when she was supposed to meet Chayton at the hidden spring. Lena's mind raced, searching for an excuse, a delay. "Father, I'm not ready for courtship. I had hoped to return east in the fall. Perhaps stay with Aunt Margaret in New York." "Nonsense." The general's eyes hardened. "Your place is here until you are properly settled. The matter is decided, Lena." Dismissed, she walked numbly back to her quarters, her thoughts in turmoil. To miss her meeting with Chayton would break her promise, perhaps convince him she had reconsidered their connection. But to defy her father again, so soon after her previous escape, would invite closer scrutiny and make future meetings impossible. That night she made her decision. She would attend dinner with Robert, maintain appearances, and then feign illness to retire early. With her father occupied entertaining the Pattersons, she might still slip away to meet Chayton, though she would be dangerously late. The following day passed with agonizing slowness. Lena went through the motions of her daily routines while constantly watching the sun's progress across the sky. By late afternoon, as she dressed for dinner, she had formulated her plan in detail. The Pattersons arrived promptly at 6. Colonel Patterson was a taller, grayer version of his son, same confident bearing, same entitled assumption that the world would bend to his will. Mrs. Patterson, a thin woman with sharp features, softened only by her genuine smile, immediately engaged Lena in conversation about Boston society and the challenges of maintaining standards on the frontier. Throughout dinner, Robert's attention remained fixed on Lena, his every statement clearly designed to impress. He spoke of his achievements at West Point, his commendations in the field, his vision for advancement through the ranks. "Of course, having a suitable wife is essential for an officer's career," he said, raising his glass in Lena's direction. "A woman of refinement and proper background makes all the difference at headquarters functions." Lena smiled tightly, acutely aware of the time passing. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of the fire in the ruined chapel where Chayton had kissed her. As dessert was served, she pressed a hand to her forehead. "I apologize, but I'm feeling rather faint. The heat today was quite oppressive." Concern immediately appeared on her father's face. "Perhaps you should retire, Lena. Mrs. Patterson will understand." The older woman nodded sympathetically. "Of course, dear. The desert climate can be so taxing for those not accustomed to it." Robert rose quickly. "Allow me to escort you to your quarters, Miss Armstrong." "That won't be necessary," Lena said hastily. "Please continue your dinner. I just need to rest." Before anyone could insist further, she made her exit, careful to maintain the appearance of someone feeling unwell but not seriously ill. In her room, she changed quickly into riding clothes, covering them with a dark shawl. The dinner would last at least another hour, giving her precious little time to reach the hidden spring before full darkness made travel dangerous. Sneaking past the sentries proved more difficult this time. Security had been tightened after the failed expedition, with more guards posted and more frequent patrols. Lena was forced to wait nearly 30 minutes for an opportunity to reach the stables unobserved. By the time she mounted Penny and rode cautiously away from the fort, Full darkness had fallen. She pushed the mare harder than was wise on the unfamiliar terrain, guided only by starlight and Chayton's directions. The hidden canyon was difficult to find even with his instructions. Twice she thought she had located the narrow entrance, only to find herself facing solid rock walls. Frustration and fear mounted as the hours passed. Chayton would think she had abandoned him, returned to her proper place in white society. Finally, nearly 3 hours late, she found the opening, a crack in the rock face barely wide enough for a horse to pass through. Beyond it, the canyon opened slightly, with steep walls rising on either side. At its end, as Chayton had described, a small spring created a pool surrounded by cottonwood trees and desert flowers that bloomed in the night. Lena dismounted, her legs shaking from the strain of the ride and the emotional turmoil of the evening. "Chayton," she called softly, moving toward the pool. No answer came. The canyon was empty, silent except for the gentle gurgle of water and the occasional rustle of leaves in the night breeze. He had waited, but eventually given up and left. The realization hit Lena with physical pain. She sank onto a boulder beside the pool, tears welling in her eyes. After all the risk she had taken, after the connection they had formed, it was over before it had truly begun. "I thought you would not come," the voice came from above. Lena looked up to see Chayton descending from a ledge halfway up the canyon wall, where he must have been watching for her approach. "I couldn't get away earlier," she said, rising to meet him as he reached the canyon floor. "My father, there was a dinner I couldn't avoid." In the starlight, his expression was unreadable. "I waited. I would have waited until dawn." The simple statement, delivered without drama or recrimination, moved her deeply. Lena closed the distance between them, propriety forgotten as she wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. "I was afraid you'd gone," she whispered. "Afraid I'd lost you." His arms enfolded her, strong and certain. "I am here, Lena Armstrong." One hand tilted her chin up until their eyes met. "And so are you, despite all that stands between us." Their second kiss was different from the first, not tentative exploration, but hungry confirmation, as if both needed to reassure themselves of the other's presence and desire. When they finally parted, breathless, Chayton led her to a small camp he had prepared beside the pool. A blanket lay spread on soft sand, with a small fire burning nearby. "Tell me what happened," he said, as they sat together, his arm around her shoulders. Lena explained about Robert's courtship, her father's approval, the expectations that threatened to suffocate her. "They've planned my entire future without consulting my heart." "And what does your heart say?" Chayton asked, his voice gentle but intent. She looked up at him, at the proud features illuminated by firelight, at the eyes that saw beyond her carefully constructed facade to the woman beneath. "It speaks your name," she answered simply, "though the world would call me mad for it." His hand caressed her cheek, his touch reverent. "Then we are both mad. Perhaps that is the only sanity in a world built on hatred and division." They talked long into the night, planning stolen moments, acknowledging the dangers, yet unable to consider ending what had begun between them. Chayton spoke of his vision for his people, not war, but a future where Apache traditions could survive alongside the inevitable changes. "My father believes fighting is the only path," he explained. "The younger warriors agree, but I have seen what lies beyond the mountains. The white man's numbers are endless. War can only end in our destruction." "Then what is the alternative?" Lena asked. "Adaptation, preservation of what matters most, our spirit, our connection to the land, while finding ways to exist in the new world." He sighed. "Few among my people wish to hear such thoughts. It sounds like surrender to them. And to my father, any compromise seems like weakness." Lena shook her head. "They are more alike than either would admit." As the night deepened around them, they spoke of impossible dreams, a place where they could be together without fear, without the weight of history and hatred separating them. Mexico, perhaps, or the northern territories, where neither Apache nor American soldiers held complete sway. "We could leave," Lena suggested, the idea forming even as she spoke it. "Find somewhere to begin anew." Chayton's expression grew troubled. "I cannot abandon my people. When my father dies, they will look to me for leadership. If I ran away with the white general's daughter, They would see it as the ultimate betrayal, she finished for him, as would my father. Reality settled over them like a cold mist. Their feelings, however genuine, existed in a world that would never accept them. Then we take what time we can, Chayton said finally, drawing her closer. Each moment a victory against those who would keep us apart. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten when they finally parted. Chayton helped Lena mount Penny, then stood looking up at her, memorizing her features in the pre-dawn light. 4 days, he said. I cannot come sooner. My father has called a council of all Apache bands. I must be there. I'll come here, Lena promised, whatever it takes. He nodded, then pressed a small leather pouch into her hand. Keep this with you. It contains sacred herbs and a hawk's feather from my first hunt. Among my people, it is a token of protection and of profound connection. Lena understood the significance of the gift, a tangible symbol of feelings that could not be openly acknowledged. She untied the ribbon from her hair and pressed it into his hand in return. So you'll remember the color of my hair when we're apart, she said softly. Chayton tucked the ribbon carefully into his shirt, close to his heart. Then he stepped back, allowing her to depart while the darkness could still hide her return to the fort. The ride back seemed faster, fueled by the lingering warmth of Chayton's embrace and the weight of the leather pouch tucked safely in her pocket. Lena reached Fort Whitman just as the eastern sky began to lighten, slipping into the stables and then her quarters without detection. As she lay in her bed, physically exhausted but emotionally alive in a way she had never experienced, Lena knew with absolute certainty that there was no turning back. Whatever the cost, whatever the danger, her heart had chosen its path. The next 4 days passed in a strange dichotomy for Lena. Outwardly, she maintained her role as the general's daughter, attending to correspondence, supervising the household, accepting Robert Patterson's increasingly confident attentions with practiced politeness. Inwardly, her thoughts remained with Chayton, counting the hours until they could meet again. Robert, interpreting her distraction as maidenly shyness, grew bolder in his courtship. He brought her wildflowers gathered by his orderly, recited poetry that had clearly been memorized for the occasion, and spoke often of their future as if it were already decided. My father believes I'll make major within 5 years, he told her, during one of their chaperoned walks around the parade ground. With the right connections and a distinguished service record, I could reach colonel by 40. And is that what you want? Lena asked, genuinely curious about the man who so confidently assumed he would be her husband. Rank and advancement? Robert looked surprised by the question. Of course. It's what every officer wants. To serve with distinction, to rise through the ranks to make one's mark on history. He squeezed her hand where it rested on his arm. And to have a suitable wife by my side during the journey. The word suitable struck Lena like a physical blow. Not beloved, not cherished, not even desired, simply suitable, appropriate, fitting for his station and ambitions. And what if I wanted something different for my life? She asked carefully. Robert laughed as if she'd made a charming joke. Different? What more could a woman want than security, social position, and a husband dedicated to his career and country? She didn't answer, recognizing the futility of trying to explain the awakening she had experienced in Chayton's arms, the revelation that life could hold passion, true connection, and a meeting of minds beyond social expectations. On the evening of the 4th day, as Lena prepared to slip away to meet Chayton, unexpected news arrived at the fort. A large detachment from Fort Bowie was approaching, led by Brigadier General William Sherman, the military commander of the Arizona Territory. Sherman himself, her father said, pacing his office with barely contained excitement. This could change everything, Lena. With proper reinforcements and Sherman's authority, we can finally mount a comprehensive campaign against the hostiles. What does that mean exactly? She asked, her mouth suddenly dry. It means, General Armstrong said with grim satisfaction, that we stop playing cat and mouse in the mountains and bring overwhelming force to bear. Sherman has used such tactics successfully against other tribes. The Apache will be no different. Horror washed over Lena as she understood the implications. Not targeted expeditions against warrior bands, but a campaign against the Apache as a people, including women, children, elders, including Chayton and his father. Surely there's another way, she ventured. The peace talks have failed repeatedly. Her father's expression hardened. "The time for talk is over, Lena. Sherman arrives tomorrow morning. I expect you to help Mrs. Harper prepare suitable quarters and a proper welcome dinner. The future of this territory may well be decided under our roof." That night, sneaking away from the fort proved easier than expected. The impending arrival of the territorial commander had created confusion and activity that provided cover for her departure. With troops preparing for inspection and officers focused on their reports, Lena slipped from her room to the stables and out a side gate with minimal risk. The ride to the hidden canyon seemed shorter now that she knew the way. Entering the narrow passage, she felt a sense of leaving one world for another, stepping from conflict into sanctuary. Chayton was already there waiting by the small pool. The relief on his face when he saw her quickly shifted to concern as she dismounted and practically fell into his arms, the weight of her knowledge finally breaking her composure. "What has happened?" he asked, holding her steady. Between shuddering breaths, Lena explained about Sherman's impending arrival and the plans for a full military campaign against the Apache. "Not just warriors," she finished. "Everyone. They want to force your people onto reservations or worse." Chayton's expression grew grave but not surprised. "We have heard rumors of such plans. The council I attended was called to discuss them. What will your people do? Some bands wish to fight to the last warrior. Others speak of fleeing to Mexico." He led her to sit beside the pool. "My father is torn. He wishes to defend our lands, but he fears for the future of our children." "And you?" Lena asked softly. "What do you believe?" Chayton was silent for a long moment, staring into the water's reflection of the star-filled sky. "I believe that the old ways are ending, whether we wish it or not. Fighting will only hasten our destruction, but surrender means losing who we are." The weight of his people's future rested on his shoulders, and Lena felt guilty for adding her own burdens. Yet she knew with sudden clarity that their private feelings and the larger conflict were inseparable, two sides of the same impossible situation. "I can't bear the thought of you being hurt," she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder, "or of my father's men hunting your people like animals." "This war began long before we met, Lena Armstrong." Chayton's arm tightened around her. "You and I are caught in currents that started flowing generations ago. Then perhaps we should create our own current." She looked up at him, a desperate plan forming in her mind. "Come back with me to the fort. Speak directly to General Sherman. You understand both worlds. You could help broker a real peace, one that might actually last." Chayton's expression reflected surprise, then cautious consideration. "Your father would never allow it, and Sherman would more likely hang me as a hostile than listen to my words." "Not if you came under a flag of truce, as my father's invited guest." Lena's words came faster as the plan took shape. "You've been inside the fort before. The officers know you as Chief Nakohe's son and representative. If you came openly, requesting to speak with Sherman—" "It would be dangerous," Chayton said, but she could see he was weighing the possibility. "For both of us." "More dangerous than war? Than the destruction of your people?" He fell silent, considering the desperate gamble. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I will need to consult with my father. Convince him that this is not surrender, but strategy." His eyes met hers, intense and serious. "If I do this, you must understand what it might cost. If they suspect your involvement—" "I know." Lena took his hands in hers. "But I can't stand by and watch this happen. Not when there might be a chance, however small, to prevent it." Their usual meeting became a strategy session. They planned how Chayton would approach the fort, openly at midday, carrying a white flag. He would request an audience with General Armstrong and the visiting commander, presenting himself as an emissary from his father, seeking one final opportunity for peace talks before hostilities escalated. "Sherman has a reputation for harsh tactics, but also for pragmatism," Lena explained. "If you can convince him that a negotiated settlement would be less costly in men and resources than a prolonged campaign—" "And if I fail?" Chayton asked quietly. "If they arrest me or worse?" Lena couldn't answer. The possibility was too terrible to contemplate. As dawn approached, they held each other by the pool, the urgency of their mission tempered by the awareness that it might be their last meeting. When Chayton finally kissed her goodbye, there was a desperate quality to his embrace, as if trying to imprint the feeling of her in his memory. 2 days, he said. "I will come to the fort at noon, 2 days from now. If my father forbids it, Or if I cannot persuade him, I will find a way to send word. I'll be waiting, Lena promised. Whatever happens, know that my heart is with you. She rode back to Fort Whitman as the eastern sky brightened, her mind racing with the audacity of their plan and the countless ways it could go wrong. Yet beneath the fear lay a core of determination. For the first time in her life, she was acting according to her own conscience rather than others' expectations. General Sherman arrived that afternoon with a cavalry escort and 4 companies of infantry. A tall, imposing figure, with a sweeping beard and piercing eyes, he dominated the welcoming ceremony with his presence alone. Lena, standing beside her father as the troops assembled for inspection, studied the man who held the fate of Chayton's people, and perhaps Chayton himself, in his hands. Sherman's reputation had preceded him. Brilliant strategist, unflinching in pursuit of objectives, advocate of hard war tactics that targeted civilian support as well as military forces. That evening, at the dinner Lena had helped prepare, she found herself seated beside the general, an honor that reflected her father's determination to showcase his family's social graces. "Miss Armstrong," Sherman said as soup was served, "your father tells me you've adapted admirably to frontier life. Not all Eastern ladies manage the transition so gracefully." "The landscape has its own beauty, General," she replied carefully. "And the people here, all the people, have much to teach those of us from the East if we're willing to listen." A flicker of interest passed through Sherman's eyes. "An unusual perspective. Most ladies I encounter at frontier posts speak only of the hardships and privations. Perhaps they haven't looked beyond the fort walls," Lena suggested. Her father cleared his throat warningly. "Lena has always had a romantic streak, General. Too many novels, I fear." Sherman chuckled indulgently. "Her youth is entitled to its idealism, Armstrong. Age and experience temper such notions soon enough." He turned back to Lena. "Have you encountered many natives during your time here, Miss Armstrong?" "I was present during the peace delegation's visit," she answered truthfully, "and I helped care for a wounded Apache boy who sought treatment from our doctor." "Indeed?" Sherman's bushy eyebrows rose. "And what impression did you form of these people?" Lena felt every eye at the table upon her. Her father's gaze particularly held a clear warning to be circumspect, yet something in Sherman's manner suggested he was genuinely interested in her answer, not merely making conversation. "I found them to be people, General Sherman, different in customs and beliefs, but with the same fundamental concerns as any people: protection of their families, preservation of their way of life, hope for their children's future." A silence fell over the table. Robert Patterson, seated across from her, looked scandalized. Her father's complexion had darkened ominously, but Sherman merely nodded thoughtfully. "An astute observation, Miss Armstrong. Indeed, understanding one's adversary is essential in any conflict." His expression hardened slightly. "Though understanding does not preclude necessary action when the nation's interests are at stake." The conversation turned to other topics, but Lena caught Sherman watching her speculatively several times throughout the evening. Whether that would work to their advantage or disadvantage when Chayton arrived, she couldn't guess. The next day passed in agonizing slowness. General Armstrong and his officers were closeted with Sherman for hours, presumably planning the campaign that would begin once reinforcements were fully assembled. Lena moved through her duties mechanically, her thoughts focused on Chayton and the desperate gamble they were about to undertake. That night, unable to sleep, she stood at her window watching the stars and wondering if Chayton was looking at the same sky, perhaps saying farewell to his father before risking everything on their plan. The enormity of what he was preparing to do, to walk alone into the stronghold of his enemies, trusting in honor and diplomacy that had failed so often before, humbled her. Morning brought heightened activity as the fort prepared for the campaign. Supply wagons were loaded, weapons inspected, horses shod. Lena watched it all with growing despair. Even if Chayton convinced his father, even if he reached the fort safely, would anyone be willing to listen? As noon approached, she positioned herself near her father's office, where Sherman and the senior officers were reviewing maps and deployment plans. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain others must hear it, but the soldiers and civilians moving about the fort were focused on their own preparations. The sentry's call came precisely at noon. "Rider approaching. Single rider under white flag." Activity in the fort paused as soldiers moved to defensive positions. From her vantage point, Lena could see Chayton approaching slowly on his paint horse, a branch with white cloth tied to it held high above his head. He rode with his characteristic straight-backed dignity, unarmed, wearing the formal attire of an Apache diplomat rather than a warrior. General Armstrong emerged from his office, Sherman beside him, both squinting against the sunlight at the approaching figure. "It's the chief's son," her father said with obvious surprise. "Chayton. Interesting timing," Sherman remarked. "Convenient, even." "Shall I have him shot?" her father asked bluntly. "He's led raids against settlements north of here." Lena's heart nearly stopped at the casual suggestion, but Sherman shook his head. "He comes under a flag of truce. Let's hear what he has to say." The general's eyes narrowed. "Though have sharpshooters positioned, Apache notions of honor don't always match our own." As Chayton rode through the gates, Lena forced herself to remain still, to show no special interest or concern. He dismounted with fluid grace, handing his white flag to the nearest soldier before turning to face General Armstrong and Sherman. If he was afraid, nothing in his bearing revealed it. His gaze swept the gathered officers briefly before settling on the two commanders. "I come on behalf of Chief Nakohe," he said, his deep voice carrying across the suddenly silent fort, "to speak with General Sherman about the future of our peoples." Sherman stepped forward, studying Chayton with frank curiosity. "Bold move, coming here alone. Your father must value peace highly to risk his heir. Or perhaps he values his people's survival," Chayton replied evenly. "War benefits no one except those who profit from death." A murmur ran through the gathered soldiers. Such direct speech was unexpected from a supposed savage. Sherman's beard twitched with what might have been amusement. "Well said. Come then, let's talk inside, away from this infernal heat." General Armstrong's jaw tightened, but he gestured toward his office. "Search him first," he ordered the nearest soldiers. Chayton submitted to the indignity without comment, allowing the thorough check for hidden weapons before following the officers into the command building. As he passed near Lena, their eyes met for the briefest moment. No more than a heartbeat. Yet in that glance passed volumes of unspoken communication. The door closed behind them, leaving Lena and the rest of the fort's occupants to wait and wonder what transpired within. Minutes stretched into an hour, then two. Soldiers returned to their duties, though with frequent glances toward the command building. Robert Patterson found Lena still lingering nearby and frowned at her evident interest. "You shouldn't concern yourself with military matters," he said, taking her arm possessively. "These negotiations, if they can be called that, are merely a formality before we begin the real work of pacification." "Do you truly believe there's no possibility for peace?" Lena asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Robert looked at her with surprise. "Peace? With savages who understand only force? The Apache will have peace when they surrender and accept life on the reservation, not before." His certainty, his absolute dismissal of any other possibility, chilled Lena to the bone. This was the man her father wanted her to marry, a man whose worldview allowed no room for understanding those different from himself. Nearly 3 hours after Chayton had entered the command building, the door finally opened. General Armstrong emerged first, his expression thunderous. Sherman followed, deep in thought, stroking his beard absently. Last came Chayton, his face impassive but his eyes alive with an intensity Lena recognized, the look of a man walking a dangerous path with absolute conviction. "Prepare quarters for our guest," Sherman instructed a nearby lieutenant. "He will remain overnight while we consider his proposal." Shock rippled through the assembled officers. Robert, still standing beside Lena, made a noise of disbelief. "Sir, with respect, keeping a hostile inside the fort." "Is my decision, Lieutenant Patterson," Sherman cut him off sharply. "The Apache have offered terms that warrant consideration. Chief Nakohe has proposed a council between our forces and all major Apache bands to be held on neutral ground, with the goal of establishing permanent boundaries and conditions for coexistence." General Armstrong's displeasure was evident in every line of his body. "A delaying tactic, nothing more. They seek to gain time to prepare for our campaign. Perhaps," Sherman conceded, "or perhaps an opportunity to avoid unnecessary bloodshed and expense to the government." He glanced at Chayton, who stood silent and dignified amid his enemies. I've seen enough of war to know that victories often cost more than defeats. We'll give their proposal proper consideration. As Chayton was escorted to the fort's small guest house, under guard but treated with the respect due an emissary, Lena felt hope flicker to life. Whatever he had said inside that room had at least given Sherman pause, opened a possibility where none had existed before. That evening, as Lena helped Mrs. Harper prepare dinner for the officers, she overheard fragments of conversation that suggested the negotiations had been more substantial than anyone had anticipated. Chayton had presented not just vague promises of peace, but specific proposals: designated territories, regulated trading posts, even a system for resolving disputes between settlers and Apache bands. "The savage was surprisingly articulate," Colonel Patterson remarked to her father, "almost as if he had been coached in what arguments would appeal to Sherman, or as if he understands both sides of the conflict," Sherman countered, entering the dining room. "The young man was educated in Eastern schools, was he not?" "To our regret," General Armstrong replied bitterly. "We taught him our language and ways, only to have him use that knowledge against us." Sherman's eyes found Lena across the room, his gaze speculative. "Sometimes understanding an adversary leads to unexpected perspectives," he said. "Your daughter made a similar observation last evening, if you recall." Heat rose to Lena's cheeks as her father turned to look at her, suspicion dawning in his eyes. Dinner proceeded with strained conversation, dominated by debate over Chayton's proposals. Sherman, to everyone's surprise, seemed genuinely interested in the possibility of negotiation rather than conflict. Several younger officers cautiously voiced support for exploring peaceful options, while the older commanders, her father included, argued vehemently for proceeding with the planned campaign. After the meal, as officers gathered for brandy and cigars, Lena slipped away to her room. Her mind raced with possibilities and fears. Chayton had accomplished the impossible, gained entry to the fort, and presented his case directly to Sherman. But he remained in danger as long as he stayed within these walls, surrounded by men who considered him an enemy. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. It was Mrs. Harper, her expression troubled. "How your father wishes to see you in his office immediately," she said. "He seemed upset." Dread settled in Lena's stomach as she made her way to the command building. Had someone seen her exchange glances with Chayton? Had her questions at dinner raised suspicions, or worse, had Chayton himself been forced to reveal their connection? Her father was alone when she entered, standing by the window with his back to the door. The rigid set of his shoulders spoke volumes. "Close the door," he said without turning. Lena obeyed, her hands clasped tightly before her to hide their trembling. "How long?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Father?" He turned then, his face a mask of controlled fury. "How long have you been meeting with the Apache, Lena? How long have you been betraying your family, your people, your country?" The directness of the accusation left no room for denial. Lena felt the blood drain from her face, but forced herself to stand straight to meet her father's gaze. "I have betrayed no one," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "I've been trying to prevent bloodshed on both sides. By consorting with the enemy, by feeding him information about our plans, our defenses." The general's voice rose with each question. "One of my officers saw you return before dawn 2 days ago. Your horse had been ridden hard. And now, coincidentally, the chief's son appears with detailed knowledge of our campaign preparations. Chayton came to prevent war, not to gather intelligence," Lena protested. "His people want peace as much as—" "His people?" Her father's interruption was like a whip crack. "And what of your people, Lena? Where do your loyalties lie?" The question struck at the heart of her dilemma. These past weeks had forced her to examine loyalties she had never before questioned. To her father, to the society that had shaped her, to the army that had been her only real home since her mother's death. "My loyalty is to what's right," she answered finally. "To the possibility that there might be a better way than endless killing." General Armstrong studied her face, his expression shifting from anger to something worse, disappointment and disgust. "How far has this gone? Has he touched you? Defiled you with his savage hands?" Heat flooded Lena's cheeks, but she met her father's gaze defiantly. "Chayton has treated me with more respect than many civilized men I've known. He sees me as a person, not as property to be claimed or a prize to be won." The implication wasn't lost on her father. His face darkened further. Robert Patterson is twice the man that Apache will ever be. He can give you a proper life, position in society, children who won't bear the stain of mixed blood. The naked prejudice in his words sickened her. This man who had raised her, whom she had respected and obeyed her entire life, suddenly seemed like a stranger. "I will not marry Robert Patterson," she said quietly but firmly. "Not now, not ever." "You'll do as you're told," her father snapped. "You're confined to quarters until Sherman departs and this Apache business is concluded. Then you'll be sent east to your aunt until you come to your senses." He moved toward the door. "As for your savage paramour, he'll be fortunate if he leaves this fort alive." Panic seized Lena. "What do you mean? He came under a flag of truce as an emissary." "Truce flags don't protect spies," the general said coldly, "especially those who corrupt American women." Before Lena could respond, he opened the door and called for the guard. "Escort my daughter to her quarters and see that she remains there. No visitors, no messages, no exceptions without my direct order." As the soldier led her across the parade ground, Lena's mind worked frantically. Chayton was in danger, immediate, lethal danger. Somehow she had to warn him, help him escape before her father could manufacture charges of espionage. In her room, after the guard had closed the door behind her, Lena paced like a caged animal. The windows were too small for escape, and even if she could slip out, the fort was now on high alert with doubled sentries. Her father would have made sure she was watched carefully. As darkness fell, she heard increased activity outside, boots on wooden walkways, officers calling orders, the sound of horses being prepared. Something was happening, and every instinct told her it involved Chayton. A tap at her window made her jump. Peering through the glass, she saw Mrs. Harper's concerned face. Lena quickly opened the window. "What's happening?" she whispered. "They're arresting the Apache," Mrs. Harper replied urgently. "Your father convinced Sherman that he came as a spy, not a peace emissary. They're taking him to the guardhouse now, pending military trial." Horror washed over Lena. A military trial would be a sham, the outcome predetermined. "Mrs. Harper, please, I have to help him. He came here in good faith, risking everything for peace." The older woman's expression was torn. "You love him," she said. It wasn't a question. Lena nodded beyond denial or pretense. "Please help me reach him, or at least get a message to him." Mrs. Harper glanced over her shoulder, then back at Lena. "My husband is treating a soldier in the infirmary, directly across from the guardhouse. He might be able to pass a message." She paused, conflict evident in her eyes. "But, Lena, what can a message do? He's surrounded by armed men in a fortified position." "Just tell him I'm trying to find a way," Lena pleaded, "and I tell him I love him." With a quick nod, Mrs. Harper disappeared into the night. Lena returned to pacing her room, her mind racing through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. She could try to steal a key to the guardhouse, create a diversion, appeal directly to Sherman. All plans with minimal chance of success and maximum risk. An hour later, a soft knock at her door preceded Mrs. Harper's return. The doctor's wife slipped inside, her expression grave. "I spoke with him," she whispered, "through the guardhouse window, while Thomas treated a guard with a toothache." "What did he say?" Lena asked eagerly. "He said to tell you he regrets nothing, that some things are worth any price." Mrs. Harper took Lena's hands in hers. "Child, they're planning to transfer him to Fort Bowie at dawn for trial. Your father doesn't trust Sherman's judgment, thinks he might be swayed by the Apache's arguments if given time." Desperation crystallized into determination in Lena's heart. "Then we have until dawn to get him out." Mrs. Harper's eyes widened. "We? Lena, I sympathize with your feelings, truly I do, but what you're suggesting is treason." "So is executing a peace emissary who came under a flag of truce," Lena countered. "Please, Mrs. Harper, I'm not asking you to help me free him, only to create an opportunity for me to try." The older woman was silent for a long moment, internal conflict evident in her expression. Finally, she sighed. "Thomas keeps spare keys to most buildings, including the guardhouse, for medical emergencies." She squeezed Lena's hands. "I can't promise anything, but I'll speak with him. He has his own doubts about how this Apache situation is being handled." After Mrs. Harper left, Lena prepared with focused intensity. She changed into her darkest riding clothes, packed a small bag with essentials, and concealed her father's spare pistol beneath her jacket. Whatever happened tonight, she wouldn't be returning to Fort Whitman, couldn't return after helping a prisoner escape. Just after midnight, when the fort had settled into the quieter rhythms of night watch, Mrs. Harper returned with her husband. Dr. Harper's expression was grave but determined. "I've treated that young man for injuries twice now," he said without preamble. "He struck me as honorable, intelligent, hardly the bloodthirsty savage your father describes. And I've seen enough of war to know that peace, even an imperfect peace, is worth pursuing." From his pocket he produced a ring of keys. "The guardhouse has 2 sentries tonight, Anderson and Mills. I've given Anderson a sleeping powder for his insomnia. It should take effect within the hour. Mills I'll need to distract with a medical emergency on the opposite side of the fort." Lena felt tears spring to her eyes at their willingness to risk everything to help her. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't," Dr. Harper said bluntly. "If this fails, we'll deny all knowledge. If it succeeds—" He sighed. "Well, I've been requesting transfer to a less remote posting for years. This might provide the perfect excuse." The plan they devised was simple by necessity. At 1:30, Dr. Harper would summon Mills to help with a medical emergency in the officers' quarters on the far side of the fort. Lena would use the keys to enter the guardhouse and free Chayton. Meanwhile, Mrs. Harper would saddle 2 horses and leave them tethered near the small rear gate used for hunting parties. "The gate will be guarded," Dr. Harper warned. "You'll have to create your own diversion there, and once you're outside, you'll have until dawn before they organize a proper pursuit." "That's all we need," Lena said with more confidence than she felt. "Just enough time to reach Chayton's people in the mountains." At the appointed hour, Lena crouched in shadows near the guardhouse, watching as Dr. Harper approached and spoke urgently to Mills. The young sentry hesitated only briefly before following the doctor toward the officers' quarters. Through the guardhouse window, Lena could see Anderson slumped at his desk, apparently asleep. She moved quickly across the open space, heart pounding as she fitted the key into the lock. The door opened with a faint creak that sounded thunderous to her strained nerves. Inside, Anderson didn't stir. The sleeping powder had done its work. Chayton sat on a narrow cot in the single cell, eyes widening as Lena appeared in the doorway. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered as she fumbled with the cell key. "Neither should you," she replied, finally opening the barred door. "They're planning to transfer you to Fort Bowie at dawn for a sham trial. My father believes you came as a spy." Chayton rose, moving silently to her side. "And you risk everything to free me." "Everything that matters is already at risk." She pressed the spare pistol into his hands. "Mrs. Harper has horses waiting by the south gate. We have perhaps 10 minutes before someone raises the alarm." As they slipped from the guardhouse, keeping to the deepest shadows, Chayton took her arm. "Lena, listen to me. If I escape alone, they'll assume I overpowered the guard. You could still—" "No!" She cut him off firmly. "I've made my choice, Chayton. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The certainty in her voice seemed to reach something deep within him. Nodding once, he took her hand, and together they moved through the sleeping fort toward the south gate. Mrs. Harper was waiting with the horses, her face pale with tension. "Hurry," she whispered. "The sentry makes his rounds every 15 minutes. Lena embraced the woman briefly. "Thank you for everything." "Be safe," Mrs. Harper replied, squeezing her hands, "and be happy if you can." The south gate still posed a significant obstacle, a sturdy wooden barrier with a single-armed guard posted on the walkway above. As they approached, hidden in shadows beside the stable, Lena and Chayton exchanged glances. "We need a diversion," she whispered. Chayton nodded, his eyes scanning their surroundings. His gaze settled on the munitions shed 20 yards away. "Can you open that?" Lena examined the keyring Dr. Harper had given her, finding one that might fit. "I think so. What are you planning?" "A small fire, enough smoke and noise to draw attention, but not enough to endanger lives." Together they crept to the shed. Lena unlocked it while Chayton kept watch. Inside he quickly located what he needed, a small powder keg, fuses, and flint. "Get to the horses," he told her. "When you hear the explosion, ride for the gate. The guard will be distracted looking toward the noise." "Be careful," she whispered, touching his face briefly before moving back toward the waiting horses. 3 minutes later, a sharp crack followed by billowing smoke erupted from behind the officers' quarters. opposite the munitions shed and far from any sleeping soldiers. Instantly, shouts of "Fire!" rose across the fort. The gate guard turned toward the commotion, leaning over the walkway to better see the source of the disturbance. Chayton appeared beside Lena, swinging gracefully onto his horse. "Now," he said, and they spurred their mounts toward the gate. The sentry turned at the sound of hoofbeats, but too late. Chayton fired a single shot into the air beside him, causing the man to duck instinctively. By the time he recovered, they had reached the gate. Chayton dismounted in one fluid motion, lifting the heavy bar while Lena kept her horse between them and the guards' line of fire. As the gate swung open, the alarm bell began to ring. Chayton vaulted back onto his horse, and they galloped into the darkness beyond the fort, the sounds of shouting and confusion fading behind them. They rode hard for an hour, following game trails and dry creek beds to leave minimal tracks. When they finally paused to rest the horses, Lena found herself laughing, a release of tension and fear, but also pure exhilaration at their escape and the open future before them. Chayton watched her with a mixture of wonder and concern. "You understand what you've done?" he asked quietly. "There's no going back." "I understand," she replied, sobering. "I've chosen sides in a war I never wanted. I've betrayed my father, abandoned my place in society, thrown away everything I was raised to value." She moved closer, taking his hands in hers. "And I would do it all again." In the starlight, his expression softened from concern to something deeper, a recognition of the sacrifice she had made, matched by his own willingness to risk everything for the possibility they represented together. "Where will we go?" she asked. "First, to my father's camp. He must be warned that the peace talks have failed, that Sherman may be persuaded to proceed with the campaign." Chayton's grip on her hands tightened. "After that, there are places in the mountains where neither Apache nor white soldiers go, or we could travel south into Mexico, find land far from this conflict. Wherever you go, I go," Lena said simply. He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I never thought to find such courage in the general's daughter, such willingness to see beyond the boundaries others have drawn. Nor I to find such wisdom and honor in the man I was taught to fear." She smiled up at him. "Perhaps that's why we found each other, to show that another way is possible, even in a world divided by hatred." As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, they continued their journey, riding higher into the rugged terrain where Chayton's people had sought refuge. Behind them, they knew soldiers would be mounting a pursuit. Before them lay uncertainty, hardship, and the constant threat of discovery. Yet as they rode side by side into the sunrise, Lena felt a peace she had never known in the ordered, predictable life she had left behind. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face together. Not as Apache and white, not as enemies divided by history and prejudice, but as two people who had found in each other something worth any price. 3 days later, they reached the hidden valley where Chief Nakohe had established the main Apache camp. Nestled high in the mountains, protected by narrow passes easily defended, the settlement sprawled along a clear stream that provided water even in the driest seasons. Their arrival caused immediate commotion. Warriors surrounded them, weapons ready, until Chayton identified himself. Even then, suspicion fell heavily on Lena, until Chayton explained in his native tongue all that had transpired at Fort Whitman. Chief Nakohe received them in his lodge, a dignified elder whose face bore the deep lines of a lifetime of struggle. His initial coldness toward Lena gradually thawed as Chayton related her role in his escape and her choice to leave her people behind. "My son says you have a brave heart," the old chief said finally, studying her with penetrating eyes, "that you see with clear vision when others are blinded by hatred." "I only wish for peace between our peoples," Lena replied, "though I fear that chance is now lost." Nakohe nodded gravely. "For this season, perhaps. The white soldiers will come, and we will retreat deeper into the mountains. But seasons change, and what seems impossible in one may become possible in another." That evening, around the council fire, Chayton formally declared his intentions toward Lena, not asking permission, for he was a grown man and warrior, but honoring tradition by announcing it before the elders and his father. "She has proven herself one of us in spirit," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "She has chosen our path over the easier one offered by her own people. I ask that she be welcomed as my wife and as a daughter of the Apache." Murmurs rippled through the assembled tribe. Many nodded in approval, particularly those who had witnessed Lena's care for the wounded boy Ahote. Others looked doubtful, generations of conflict not easily set aside, but none spoke against Chayton's declaration. Whether out of respect for him or for his father's authority, Lena couldn't tell. Nakohe rose slowly, his age evident in the stiffness of his movements, but his voice still strong. The ways of the Great Spirit are mysterious. Perhaps this union between our son and the white woman is meant to teach us something we have yet to understand. He looked directly at Lena. If you would be one with my son, you must learn our ways, our language, our beliefs. Can you set aside the teaching of your people and open your heart to a new path? I already have, Lena answered, her eyes meeting Chayton's across the fire. My heart chose its path the moment we met. The following day, as the tribe prepared to move deeper into the mountains ahead of the anticipated military campaign, Lena and Chayton were joined in an Apache wedding ceremony. Simple by the standards of Boston society, yet profound in its connection to the natural world and ancestral traditions, the ritual bound them together before the tribe and the spirits their people revered. Lena wore a dress of soft deerskin, decorated with beadwork hastily but lovingly prepared by the women of Chayton's extended family. The ceremony took place beside the stream, with Chief Nakohe blessing their union by binding their hands with a woven cord and having them drink from the same vessel of clear mountain water. As this water nourishes both your bodies with the same essence, he intoned, so may your spirits be nourished by the same love, the same courage, the same wisdom. After the ceremony, as the tribe celebrated with dancing and feasting despite the shadow of approaching conflict, Chayton led Lena to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. Are you certain? He asked, searching her eyes for any hint of doubt or regret. This life will not be easy. We will always be between worlds, never fully belonging to either. Lena touched his face, tracing the proud line of his jaw with gentle fingers. Perhaps that's exactly where we're meant to be. Between worlds, building a bridge others might someday cross. She smiled, a flash of mischief in her eyes. Besides, I never much cared for corsets and calling cards anyway. Chayton laughed, pulling her into his embrace. My brave, impossible woman, he murmured against her hair. Whatever comes, we face it together. Together, she agreed, lifting her face for his kiss as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors as vibrant and unexpected as the love they had found across the seemingly unbridgeable divide of their worlds. 5 years later. The trading post at the edge of the New Mexico territory was a bustling center of commerce where cultures met and mingled with surprising harmony. Apache, Navajo, Mexican, and American traders exchanged goods, stories, and occasionally wary friendship. On the wide porch of the main building, a small boy of about 4 raced back and forth, his dark eyes bright with excitement as he spotted an approaching wagon. His features were a striking blend of his parents', his father's strong bone structure softened by his mother's delicate nose and mouth, his copper skin a shade lighter than the Apache children who played nearby. "Papa, Mama Ryder's coming," he called in English, then repeated the warning in Apache for his playmates. From inside the trading post emerged a tall man with the bearing of a chief, though he wore the practical clothing of a frontier trader. Chayton shaded his eyes against the afternoon sun, studying the approaching wagon with the caution that had become second nature during years of living between worlds. Beside him appeared Lena, her chestnut hair now worn in a single long braid, her skin tanned by years of mountain sun. She carried a baby girl on her hip, the infant's curious eyes taking in the bustling scene around her. "Army wagon," Chayton noted quietly. 2 officers, 4 enlisted. Lena nodded, instinctively drawing their son, Elias, closer to her side. Though 5 years had passed since their escape from Fort Whitman, caution remained necessary. The military still occasionally sent patrols looking for the general's daughter and the renegade Apache, though the intensity of the search had diminished with time and the emergence of new conflicts elsewhere in the territories. As the wagon drew nearer, Lena stiffened in recognition. "It's Lieutenant Collins," she whispered. "Now, Captain, it seems." Chayton's hand moved imperceptibly closer to the knife at his belt. "Friend or enemy?" "I never knew him well enough to say," she admitted. "He was always fair, more open-minded than most at the fort. The wagon stopped before the trading post. Captain Collins, older and more weathered than Lena remembered, surveyed the scene with careful eyes that widened slightly when they fell on her and Chayton. "Miss Armstrong," he said, recovering quickly, "or I suppose that's not your name anymore." "Lena Nakohe," she replied, using the name she and Chayton had adopted after their marriage. His father's name, honoring the old chief who had died defending his people 2 winters past. Collins nodded, his gaze taking in the children, the trading post, the evident prosperity of their small settlement. "We've been sent to establish a new boundary line for the reservation," he explained. "The government has abandoned the campaign against the free Apache bands. Too costly, too few results." Relief washed through Lena, though she kept her expression neutral. For 5 years they had lived with the knowledge that military action could force them to flee deeper into the wilderness at any moment. "The war is over?" Chayton asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Not officially," Collins admitted, "but the policy has changed. Treaties, reservations, gradual assimilation." He looked uncomfortable with the last word, aware of its implications for native cultures. "And my father?" Lena asked, the question that had haunted her for 5 years finally finding voice. Collins's expression softened. "Retired last year. Lives in Boston now." He hesitated. "He doesn't speak of you, but he keeps a photograph on his desk, you as a young girl before your mother passed." The revelation touched something deep in Lena's heart. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but a recognition of the complexity of love and loyalty that had driven both their choices. "You won't report finding us?" Chayton asked directly. Collins surveyed their settlement, the trading post that served as neutral ground between cultures, the mixed children playing together, the evident peace they had built in this remote corner of the territory. "Report what?" he said finally. "I came to survey boundary lines, not search for ghosts from the past." He tipped his hat. "Good day to you, Mrs. Nakohe, Mr. Nakohe. A pleasure doing business with your establishment." As the captain returned to his wagon, ordering his men to make camp a respectful distance away, Lena leaned against Chayton's solid presence. "It seems the world is changing after all," she murmured. "Slowly," he agreed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Too slowly for many, but it changes nonetheless." Their son tugged at Chayton's sleeve, impatient for attention. "Papa, you promised to teach me tracking today." Chayton smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "So I did. Go fetch your moccasins and we'll find deer trails before sunset." As Elias raced away, Lena gazed at the mountains that had sheltered them, at the trading post they had built as a meeting place between cultures, at the children of mixed heritage playing in the yard, living embodiments of the bridge they had begun to build 5 years ago. "We'll never fully belong anywhere," she said softly, echoing Chayton's words from their wedding day. He turned to her, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "We belong to each other," he corrected gently, "and perhaps someday others will find the courage to cross the same divide." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Lena stood with her family at the edge of 2 worlds that had once seemed impossibly separate. Their path had not been easy, marked by loss and sacrifice on both sides. Yet as she watched her son return, eager for his father's teachings, and felt her daughter's weight against her hip, Lena knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again. For in Chayton's arms, in the family they had created, in the community growing around their trading post, she had found something rare and precious, a love powerful enough to transcend the boundaries of culture and history, strong enough to build a future where understanding might someday replace fear, and acceptance might finally conquer hatred. "I can't hide it any longer," she had cried in a moment of desperate honesty 5 years ago. And his answer then as now remained their truth and their hope. "Then let me love you openly." In the fading light of day, with the promise of peace finally on the horizon, they had achieved exactly that. A love lived openly, defiantly, and completely, despite all that had tried to keep them apart. The end. My dear listener. Like Lena and Chayton, many of us have stood at crossroads where the easier path was not the right one. We've faced moments where society's expectations pulled us in one direction, while our hearts whispered truth in another. Their story reminds us that true courage often means following that quiet inner voice, even when the world seems to stand against us. In your own journey through life's many seasons, You have undoubtedly shown similar courage, perhaps in standing by a loved one when others walked away, perhaps in holding fast to your principles when compromise seemed easier, perhaps in opening your heart to love again after loss. This same spirit that carried Lena and Chayton through their trials lives in you too. As you prepare for rest tonight, carry this thought with you. Boundaries between people, whether of culture, belief, or background, exist primarily in our minds. Love, like water, finds its way through even the smallest openings, nourishing unexpected gardens in the process. The courage to love authentically, to see beyond surface differences to the humanity we share, remains one of life's most powerful forces. Your years have given you wisdom that the young are still seeking. You understand, as Lena and Chayton learned, that life's most meaningful paths aren't always the easiest ones, but you also know the profound peace that comes from living in harmony with your deepest values. Rest well tonight. Let your dreams be as vast and beautiful as those western skies. Know that your life story, with all its chapters of love, challenge, growth, and connection, is a powerful light in this world. Like our frontier lovers, you have faced your own wilderness and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Tomorrow awaits with fresh possibilities, just as each sunrise brought new hope to Lena and Chayton in their mountain sanctuary. May you greet it with the same courage, the same openness of heart, and the same unwavering belief in love's transformative power. With deepest gratitude for sharing this journey with us. Wild West Whispers. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. If this story moved you, please consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing to our channel. Your support truly keeps us inspired to keep telling stories full of love, redemption, and powerful twists. Click on the next suggested story at the end of the video. You'll be surprised and touched by another emotional journey, just like this one. We'll see you there. With love. The Wild West Whispers team.